In this chapter, we're going to be taking a look at transforming objects and a little bit of animation. Now with HTML5, there's a couple of new ways we can do this. One is by using some new properties in CSS3, and the other is by using the canvas element that we saw in the previous chapter, and using some JavaScript. So we're going to be taking a look at the CSS3 stuff first. I've already got my working files open at chapter 7, and let me go to the first document here, try CSS3 Transforms. And as usual, we'll open it up in our browser. And you can see we've got a picture and some text in here with several different headers. And then let's open it up inside of our text edit application as well, so we can start editing it. Our new CSS3 properties will work on any block element inside of HTML. So I've set this document up with a few divs that we can work with. You can see down here in the code, each one of my sections has a little title that's an H2, a div, and inside the div we've got some sample text and an image dropped in, so we can see how things look. Now I've already set up little sections for each one of the things that we can do. As you can see, we can rotate, scale and stretch, move and translate, or even skew our HTML5 elements, and we can do them all at once. So let's start by working through each one of these examples. We're doing it all with CSS3, and I'm just using a style tag up here at the top. Now you can see I've got the basic div settings set up so that all of my divs will have the same properties, but I've also got some styles set up for the individual class styles for each one of the divs we've created. So let's try rotated first. The property we're going to use is called transform. So I'll just add that property to the rotated class. And basically what we're going to be doing is calling a function to execute the operation we want to perform. In this case, we're going to use a rotate. And all we need to do is add in a value that represents the angle that we want to rotate. Now this rotate function is like our RGB and our URL functions in that it has parentheses, very much like our JavaScript does. And I'm just going to specify, let's say about a 30-degree rotation. I'll put in 30 and then use degrees to indicate my measurement. I'll close off the parentheses, and that would be the style that's going to perform the rotate for us. Now unfortunately, the transform property is one of our newest ones. So at the time I'm recording this, only the newest version of Google Chrome supports it. For all the rest of the browsers, you're going to have to add in a prefix. Now since I'm testing in the Firefox browser, I'm going to add the Firefox prefix first. It looks the same as the other prefixes we've used. I'll start it off with dash, and then MOZ, dash, and then the property name, transform. The value settings are exactly the same. So I'll put in here rotate and 30 degrees. Now let's save our changes and we'll see what it looks like. I'll just refresh the page and we can see that the div in the rotated section has indeed rotated 30 degrees. Now as I said before, my code will only work in the Firefox browser. So especially if you're using one of the other browsers for testing, you'll want to know what the other codes are going to look like. So let's go back and set that up in our document. I'll stay with the rotated property for right now, and I'll just copy the first line, because in each case the values will be the same. Now if we wanted to target the Safari or earlier Google browsers, I would use a WebKit prefix, and that's dash WebKit dash transform. We can also use a prefix to make sure that this will work in the Microsoft Internet Explorer version 9 browser by using dash MS dash transform. And finally, if you want it to work in the Opera browser, you would use dash O dash transform. And if you have some of these browsers installed on your machine, you may want to test each one. Next, let's try some of the other transform properties. We'll go to the scaled section, and of course, we're going to be working on the div with the class set to scaled here. I'll just go right up to my style definition. And again, to save a little typing, I'm only going to be using the prefix for the browser that I'm testing in. So I'm going to set up a dash MOZ dash transform property. This time, we're going to use scale. It's also a function, and we need to give it a value. In this case, the value represents a ratio or scale factor. If we enter 1, the div won't be scaled at all, it'll be the same size. So I'm going to enter 0.5, and that way our final div should be half the size of the original. I'll save that change. We'll go back to my browser, and I'll just refresh the page. And we can see down here that the scaled div and its contents are all half-sized. Our next function is translate, and that simply moves the document in any direction in X or Y. So let's go back and try that out. I'll start by adding my MOZ-transform property again. And this time, first we'll try translate x. The x is capitalized when we make this function call. And what we need to do is give it a measurement of how far we want it to move in the x direction. So let me move it over about, let's say, 200 pixels. I'll add my pixels as the measurement. We'll save our change and go see how that looks. Now you can see the translated one has been pushed over by 200 pixels, and this movement is independent of any other positioning that you might use in normal CSS. Let's try it out in the y direction now. Back in the code here, I'll just change translate x to translate y. We'll make sure that's a capital letter just like before, and I'm going to set the value a little bit smaller this time. I'm going to set it to just about 50 pixels. We'll save our change, and let's go see how that looks. Now you can see the div and its contents have been pushed down so that it's actually overlapping the next title. Using the skew function on HTML elements is somewhat the same in that we have a skew x and a skew y direction. So let's try that out on our next div. Once again, I'm going to start out with MOZ-transform. And this time we'll call the skew function. We'll call skew y first. For this function, I need to give it an angle measurement. So let me skew something small like 20 degrees. Let's save our change. And back out here in the web browser, you can see that it's skewed vertically by 20 degrees, just that nice angle right there. And of course, if we go back and change skew y to skew x, we'll see the skew in the other direction. I'll save and refresh the page. And of course, there's the skew in the x direction. Now our last section down here at the bottom has a heading that says all. And that's simply because we can add up all these different functions and run them in the same line if we want to. Let's go back to our document and try that out. Now once again, I'm just going to try the Firefox one. And this one starts out the same way as the others. -moz-transform property. And then I simply add in all the functions that I want to call. For instance, let me try a scale property. I'll do 0.75 this time, so it's a little bit bigger. And then I simply leave a space, and then I'll call the rotate property. Let's rotate -45 degrees. I'll end off my line as usual. Let's save our changes, and let's see how that section looks. I'll refresh the page, and you can see that it's scaled down to a smaller size and then rotated -45 degrees, which means it went counterclockwise instead of clockwise.